All hail, artillery. King of battle, follow me. Hey everybody, it's Rabbit. Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be briefly looking at some of the dev server stuff for the new update, King of Battle, coming for War Thunder. And what better place to start than the namesake of this update, the M109 Paladin. Now, if you're not familiar, while in the Soviet military, artillery is often referred to as the god of war, in the American military, it actually goes by another name, the King of Battle, which is an appropriate name for this update. The M109 Paladin is one of the most produced artillery systems in the latter part of the 20th century and used by basically everybody. And by basically everybody, I mean all but 3 nations in the game are slated to get M109s with the next update. The only 3 nations that aren't getting it are France, China, and Russia. From what it looks like right now, the M109s are going to be pretty traditional high explosive slingers. They have a good high explosive shell. They also have a proximity fuse, but likely won't be that useful. They have smoke rounds, etc, etc, etc. They're mostly sitting around the 6.0 to 6.3 range, and the only major difference is some of them have the short barrels, some of them have the long barrels, and some of them have pintle mounted 50 cals, some of them have pintle mounted 7.62s. It's not anything super major that will affect their performance though. Currently on the dev server, it actually has an autoloader with a 13-second reload. I'm not really sure about that because while the M109 does have essentially a rammer to assist loading, it's not actually auto-loaded, it is manually loaded, so I don't know, it's a little weird, but it's whatever. As with most artillery pieces, you basically have no armor. You do get some minor artificial survivability in that you don't have a lot of armor to generate shrapnel or trigger like APHE fuses, and you do have a decent amount of crew, but probably shouldn't expect to be able to take hits in these things. Overall, a fun addition to the game. Probably not anything game-breaking, but should at least be interesting. Next up for USA Ground, we have the T-54E2. Now this is very similar to the T-54E1, except it doesn't have the auto-loaded turret. It does have better turret armor, which is pretty nice. Also has the same reload as the T-54E1 if you ace the crew, which is kind of weird. And additionally, it's also at a slightly lower battle rating. I don't know, it looks like a decent little GE premium if you want to pick it up, but it's not really anything special. Next up, we have the F-111A Aardvark coming to the bomber line in the American tech tree. This is going to be the fastest aircraft in the game when it comes in. It's going to have one of the largest bomb loads as well. Despite all of that, it's not that much of a brick in terms of its flight performance, although you probably shouldn't be expecting to take a lot of 1v1s in it. It's not as bad as it looks on the surface. It can carry a large number of air-to-air missiles. Unfortunately, all of them are AIM-9Bs, and it does need to carry an internal cannon if it wants to have any sort of gun. It can carry up to 6 20mm Vulcans, which is pretty interesting, but I'm not sure most people will exercise that option. It does have access to bullpups, but its guided munitions are fairly weak for a 10.3. Overall, it's not really going to light the world on fire, but I don't think it'll be that bad either. Should be at least be an interesting to pick up, and might also be a pretty good grinder given its speed and payload. Next up, we have for the American tree the MH-60 Blackhawk. This is a combat-oriented version. You have 4 hardpoints. You can equip those hardpoints with stingers, hellfires, or rocket pods. So overall, very similar to the Apache, except basically just worse. You don't have a gun. You also can't equip stingers and hellfires at the same time, or more accurately, the stingers have to take up the hardpoints that you would use for the hellfires. So it is kind of just a downgrade over the Apache and even the Zulu Cobra, except that it's currently slated at 11.3. I hope it doesn't enter the game at that battle rating, because that'll be pretty unfortunate for it, as it means it's basically the same battle rating as things that are objectively better, and also would be a higher battle rating than the Ka-50, but we'll wait and see. I hope it enters the game at a lower battle rating than 11.3, because if it does, it's kind of dead on arrival, but it is a cool aircraft. For Germany, we have the MiG-29G. The MiG-29G is essentially the Russian MiG-29 SMT. It has the same weapons, has the same technology, etc. in it, except it's also lighter, so it has better flight performance, which also brings up another point. The flight performance of quite a few of the vehicles are being changed. Specifically, the F-16 and MiG-29 are getting flight model changes. So exactly how that impacts like the meta at top tier, nobody really knows at this point, but it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. Next up for the Russian tree, we have a Russian pancake, the Object 775. Very small, very low to the ground vehicle that has a hydropneumatic suspension, so it can go even lower if you really want to. The vehicle only has a 2-man crew, so its survivability isn't great, but it does have absolutely preposterous frontal armor. I'm not actually sure these values are correct, especially based on the dimensions of this vehicle, but we'll see if what happens when it goes live. Currently has a 5-second reload with its main gun, but its main gun is also a gun missile launcher. So your primary anti-tank round is a missile that doesn't have a tandem warhead and has about 500 millimeters of penetration. So not the best against things like composite armor, and not the best if you do happen to run into into something like a lot of the Chinese vehicles of the ERA, but I don't know. It's an interesting vehicle. It might end up being very overpowered if the armor stays in its current state, but we'll wait and see. Next up for Russia, we have the BTR-152D, which is a BTR-152 with 2 extra guns. That's really it. It's not anything special, but it does provide some pretty good spread of fire for the round, so it should be a reasonably effective low-tier AA. Overall, a nice little addition, but shouldn't be too overpowered, or even really too underpowered. It's just a good dedicated AA. Next up for the UK, we have the Vickers Mark 11. Vickers Mark 11 is a fairly mobile wheeled vehicle, pretty good gun, coming in at around 8.7. It's coming in as an event vehicle. Overall, it should be a nice event vehicle. It's kind of on the big side, but it should have all the features you want for a wheel vehicle at this battle rating, so it should be interesting. Next up, we have another British event vehicle. This is the Strike Master, which is actually an Australian trainer. It's going to be coming in as a 6.0 ground attacker. The ground attack munitions it has for 6.0 are fine. It is a very low tier jet, so its flight performance should take a lot of prop planes by surprise. The biggest weakness is that its main guns are very bad. They're basically 30 caliber machine guns, which are kind of awful, and it only has 2 of them. So that's probably going to be unfortunate for it, but as a 6.0 ground attacker, it should be a pretty fun vehicle. Next up, we have a brand new Japanese top tier SPAA, the Tansa. The Tansa is only dropping at 10.3, so it's not a true top tier AA, but it is at least better than the Type 93. It does use infrared missiles, not radar guided missiles, so you can't manually try to hit targets with it, and it is vulnerable to flares, but it does supposedly have an electro-optical system to defeat IRCMs, so that should be nice. As a piece of useless trivia, I did have the opportunity not too long ago to pick the brain of an American Apache pilot about the IRCM systems on their birds, and the Apache pilot said they were so useless that they basically went back and removed them because they were just extra weight. But that's the story of one pilot at one unit, so it's purely anecdotal, but I did find it amusing nonetheless. Next up, we have the Chinese PLZ-83. It's a self-propelled artillery system. It is very similar to the M109 in a lot of ways. I'm not really sure what the differences are going to be when they ultimately drop, but it looks very similar. The effectiveness of the shells look pretty similar, so another fun derp gun. Should be interesting to use, and it's appropriate for the update, so it works. Next up, we have the Brea 9053, a giant 90mm cannon strapped to the back of a truck. This vehicle is really powerful for its battle rating in terms of firepower. The mobility seems to be okay. The survivability is probably better than you expect just because it has a lot of crew and doesn't really have a lot of great places to generate shrapnel or cause APHE rounds to fuse off of. So it has some degree of artificial survivability, but you would definitely want to keep it at a distance. It seems like it's a fun vehicle, and I'm glad it's in the game, so that's pretty nice. Next up, we have a positively ludicrous Italian vehicle, the Leopard 4070. This is a Leopard 1 hull with a 40mm Bofors station bolted to the back. And this thing is currently slated to enter the game at 4.3. Now, it's important to remember at 4.3, the hull of the Leopard 1 isn't bad and can bounce quite a few shells. On top of that, the turret doesn't seem like it's going to be that good for fusing APHE rounds, and most of the crew is in the turret. And on top of that, the Leopard 1's pretty mobile, and the 40mm is getting a belt that has 90mm of penetration. This thing seems like it could be an absolute monster if it enters the game at 4.3, but there are some other soft factors limiting it. The turret traverse and elevation are quite poor, so maybe, but I'm really nervous that this thing is going to enter the game at way too low for BR and wreck the matchmaker. And lastly, for Italians, they're getting an updated version of the Mongoose, the AH-129D, that can carry Spike, Fire, and Forget missiles, which is interesting because technically Apaches can carry the Spikes. They're rated for them. So I'm interested, especially with all the Apaches moving up, to see if they're actually going to add those to the Apaches when the update drops, but we'll just have to wait and see. It's a nice addition to Italy, especially because their older helicopters weren't that competitive. Moving on to France, we have the AMX-10P. This is an armored personnel carrier. It has a reasonably fast-firing 20mm cannon. It's amphibious, doesn't have a lot of armor. It's being added to the game as a low-tier SPAA. What I found a little odd about this was that versions of the AMX-10 do have the Milan mount, the same kind of mount you have on the Martyr, so I'm kind of surprised they don't just have a version with Milan missiles at a higher battle rating, but it is what it is. I feel like France could have used an IFV at a much higher battle rating rather than a kind of dopey AA at a lower one, but we'll see how it works out. France is also getting access to the M26 Persing, so if anybody was wondering why the Persing got nerfed with the last battle rating update, now we know, because Gaijin hates France. In all seriousness, the Persing is reasonably functional, it's just in an odd place in the US tech tree, so maybe the French tech tree will find some better uses for it. And another interesting addition to France, they're getting the Tiger Hat Block 2, the other NATO helicopter that's getting spiked missiles this update, which is, again, the reason why I kind of suspect the Apaches might be getting them too, or at least some versions, but we'll wait and see. Either way, much like Italy, France hasn't really had a good top-tier attack helicopter for a while, so will be a nice addition to them, and it will certainly help out their top-tier lineups that are always a little sparse. And for the last vehicle we're going to be covering, this is the Swedish PBV 501. This is essentially a BMP-1, but it doesn't have any form of guided missile, and it's dropping at 7.0, which is a little odd to me personally, given that the PT-76s, which are very similar to a BMP-1 with no missile, are all the way down at like 5.3, 5.7 range. So I'm not really sure that this deserves to be at its current battle rating, but we'll wait and see on that. As far as some other general stuff coming with a new update, they're adding new maps for ground and air. The new ground map actually has two different versions, one for low BRs that has a destroyed blimp, and one for higher BRs that has a destroyed cargo plane, which is a pretty cool little detail. They're also adding the ability of sabos to produce petals and for those petals to do damage and impact the ground, but right now it generates a lot of visual noise, so I kind of hope they'll tone that down before the update itself. They also added armor-piercing bombs to the game that can use the bomb's own momentum to kind of crash through things before detonating. Kind of a cool feature. I'm wondering how that'll interact with tanks. Like, could you just kill somebody with the physical bomb without it exploding? That'd be an interesting idea. But anyway, overall the update is shaping up to be kind of interesting. It is very artillery top-heavy, but as the name implies, that's kind of the idea. So, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Which vehicles are you looking forward to? Which vehicles are you not looking forward to? Do you like the idea of maps that change based on what battle rating you're playing at? Feel free to let me know, and like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Hope you have a nice day, everybody.